I had an affair with a neighbor a few weeks ago, which is something I deeply regret, and for which I'm truly sorry. To protect our privacy, I'll use fake names as I recount the story. My husband, whom I'll call Jesse, 48 years old, and I, known as Debbie, 44 years old, have been married for 24 years and have 3 adult children. We all reside in the Las Vegas area. Jesse works for a company that supports gaming machines, and I used to work in the casino food and beverage industry. My husband has been with his company for 23 years and has been quite successful, earning a 6-figure income. Similar to my husband, I was a dedicated employee, working for a reputable company for a decade until I was laid off. This sickness, or whatever it may be called, essentially devastated our industry, and it's only recently beginning to recover. However, many establishments may never reopen. While we don't rely on my income to cover our living expenses, I'd love to return to work now to keep my mind occupied and distract myself from the mess I've created. Additionally, I might need the income if my husband decides to divorce me. Now, let me explain what transpired. As you're aware, Las Vegas was under lockdown from March to June. Consequently, I was laid off in March, while my husband's company managed to keep him consistently employed, except for the 2 weeks when everything was shut down. Initially, I was fine with the situation, but like everyone else, I started feeling restless being cooped up at home. Being isolated and unable to go anywhere was making me feel restless. When the casinos began to partially reopen in June, I started visiting the local casinos near our home to pass the time. Typically, I would go right after my morning walk, spend the entire morning there, and return home in time for a late lunch. I had established a nice little routine, and it was enjoyable. Now, this is where fate sometimes presents you with a difficult situation or dangles temptation in front of you when you're feeling weak and vulnerable. One day, I drove across the valley to visit a popular casino I hadn't been to before. While I was there, I ran into a neighbor named Nate. Unfortunately, his company had permanently shut down and gone out of business just a few months after the lockdown. We struck up a conversation, and like me, Nate had started going to casinos to pass the time and clear his head. After a brief chat, we decided to enter the casino together. It was Nate's first time there as well. I noticed a type of slot machine that I wanted to play, and Nate said he'd try his luck on similar machines, sitting 2 chairs down from me. Those machines we chose turned out to be quite lucky, and we both started winning. Each of us was up over $200, and we continued playing those machines throughout the morning. Eventually, we decided to cash out and grab something to eat. I had packed a cooler filled with fruit, cheese, lunch meat, power bars, and other snacks, as I had planned to spend much of the day there. Since the casino had limited food options, I invited Nate to join me for lunch at my car. He asked me if I was certain, and I assured him that I was. We returned to my car, and I opened the tailgate. We stood back there, chatting and eating. It felt refreshing to stand up after spending so long in front of the slot machines. After our meal, we decided to take a stroll around the small downtown area near the casino, where we saw the desolate streets and closed stores. It was genuinely disheartening. Later, we went back inside the casino and continued gambling for a couple more hours, sticking close to each other. As we were leaving, Nate inquired if I planned to do it all over again tomorrow, and I replied affirmatively, though I wasn't sure where. He suggested we return to the same casino, considering it had been lucky for us, and we had a great time. I agreed, saying, "Okay, that sounds good." Nate proposed that he would bring lunch the next time, and we could eat at my car. I agreed again, sealing the deal. On my drive back home, I called Jesse and shared my day with him. I mentioned that I had bumped into Nate at the casino, and we ended up chatting for the entire 40-minute drive without going into specific details of my day. I've come to realize through online research that this was the point at which I officially began cheating on my husband. As I type this, tears stream down my face, and I feel incredibly foolish and selfish. The following day, we rendezvoused at the same casino and had lunch at his truck. Along with the meal, Nate brought a bottle of champagne and 2 glasses to celebrate our winnings from the previous day. As our lunch concluded and we strolled back into the casino, Nate kissed me, and I didn't resist. Inside the casino, we resumed playing the slots, sitting side by side. However, our hormones got the best of us, and before long, we found ourselves in the spacious back seat of his truck, where we spent the next hour together. Once again, I am overwhelmed with shame and disgust as I type this. After we finished, Nate suggested that I return to the casino, but I declined, telling him I was going home. I informed him that this was a grave mistake and that we must not see each other again. Nate persistently tried to convince me that no one would ever discover our secret as long as we continued to meet discreetly in the mornings at distant locations, avoiding any other form of communication. I firmly declined Nate's suggestion, gave him a friendly hug, and made my way home. At that moment, I longed to hear Jesse's voice, so I called him, and we had a conversation as I drove back home. Upon arriving home, I indulged in the longest bath I've ever taken. Later that night, I prepared Jesse's favorite meal, donned his preferred mini sundress, and ensured I took extra special care of him in bed. This wasn't anything out of the ordinary for us. Jesse knew that when I cooked his favorite dish and wore a revealing outfit, he was in for a particularly delightful dessert. I've been doing this for our entire 25-year relationship, and it never loses its appeal. I can honestly say that I'm more deeply in love and attracted to him now than ever before. For the following 2 weeks, everything seemed to be going smoothly, and I believed I had left the terrible mistake with Nate behind me, never to be uncovered. Then, one afternoon, Jesse sent me a text message explaining that he would be working overtime and wouldn't be home until very late. He added that I shouldn't bother preparing dinner, as he planned to grab something on the way. I requested that he call me when he had the chance or was on his way back home, but to my surprise, he didn't, which was highly unusual for him. This should have raised a red flag for me. When he eventually arrived home at 8 p.m., he was accompanied by my brother-in-law, Bil, and his wife, Isil. It wasn't out of the ordinary since we frequently hung out together and were all close friends. Upon their entry into the house, I sensed that something was amiss, so I inquired if everything was all right. Jesse asked me to take a seat and mentioned that he wanted his brother and Sil present as witnesses. I was uncertain about what he was going to say, but a heavy feeling settled in my stomach. He then proceeded to disclose that he had met with Nate's wife earlier, and she had divulged everything about my involvement with Nate. I asked, "What did she tell you?" Jesse calmly advised me not to feign ignorance. He stated that he possessed photographic and video evidence of the affair on his phone, and he displayed a photo of Nate and me kissing beside his truck. At that moment, tears welled up in my eyes, and I admitted that I could explain. I clarified that it wasn't an ongoing affair, but rather a single regrettable mistake, and I expressed my profound remorse. In essence, Jesse made it clear that, to him, the frequency didn't matter. Whether it was a one-time occurrence or happened repeatedly, our marriage was at its end. Upon hearing this, I was overwhelmed, nearly losing consciousness. I buried my face in the table and wept, while my husband Bil and Cl observed my anguish for over 10 minutes without offering any comfort. After some time, I managed to compose myself and lifted my head. At that moment, Jesse informed me that he wanted me to leave. I pleaded with him not to go through with it, but he remained resolute. I expressed my reluctance to depart from our home and be separated from him. He warned me that if I didn't leave, he would be the one to go, and the next communication from him would come through his attorney. Recognizing that this situation was entirely my fault, I inquired, "If I leave, where would you like me to go?" He responded indifferently, stating he didn't care where I went. He simply wanted to be apart from me. At this point, I hoped that my Bil or Sil would step in and offer me a place to stay, but they, along with my husband, gazed at me with disapproval without uttering a word. I went into the bedroom and gathered a few items. When I came out, I informed Jesse that I was leaving and inquired if I could return the following day. He agreed but specified it should be after he returns from work. I sought refuge at a friend's place, a colleague who has become a close friend and a great confidant. We spent most of the night discussing my actions. She provided significant support, as she had unfortunately experienced similar situations. She had a one-night stand and her husband discovered it but decided to reconcile. They remained together for 8 months but eventually divorced. As a side note, he recently married one of their former neighbors. We both suspect he might have been involved with her while still married, although she lacks concrete evidence. The next day, I called my husband and we had a brief conversation. We arranged to meet at our house at 6 p.m. Upon my arrival, my Bil and Sil were once again present with him. Seeing them, I requested a private discussion, but Jesse insisted on their presence as witnesses. I assured him that I would never intentionally harm him, but he responded with a stern and disapproving gaze. My husband informed me that he intended to initiate divorce proceedings, and had already hired a lawyer. I couldn't control my emotions and started crying again, feeling as though I might faint. He explained that we could continue living in the same house during the process, but only as roommates, not as a married couple. Despite my pleas, he remained resolute and unyielding. Furthermore, he expressed his desire for me to find alternate accommodation for the next week, as he needed space to clear his thoughts and didn't want me around. He disclosed that he had already spoken to our 3 children earlier in the day, sharing everything with them. According to him, they had all offered to let me stay with them if I had the courage to face them. I questioned why he had informed them without me, and he stated that they needed to understand the reason behind our divorce. I insisted that we didn't need to divorce, and that we could work through our issues, because I loved him more than anything. However, he simply replied that he had made up his mind and made a provocative remark, something along the lines of, "It had a good run, but now it's over." That evening I stayed over at my eldest daughter's apartment. My son and youngest daughter joined us there, and the 3 of them expressed their anger and disappointment until around 11 p.m. Eventually, they eased up, and we reconciled with hugs. I agreed to spend 2-3 nights at each of their places until their dad allows me to return home. Despite their initial anger, they genuinely want their dad and me to reconcile. I'm currently sitting on my daughter's couch while she's at work, and I decided to write this post seeking advice. Has anyone else found themselves in a similar situation? Specifically, I'd appreciate hearing from women who have been married for years and had a one-night stand. How did you handle it? Did your marriage survive? What steps did you take to make amends? Update. I have never cheated before and will never cheat again. I do not have a gambling problem or any other addictions. I have not been in contact with Nate and have no intention of doing so. However, I do feel the need to apologize to his wife. I'm unsure how Nate's wife acquired those pictures and videos. I did take an at-home STD test and will share the results with my husband. Absolutely, Jesse is unquestionably the father of my 3 children. Let's not even entertain absurd notions. Update. I apologize for not providing an update sooner, but you can imagine the turmoil I've been experiencing. Firstly, I have some fantastic news to share. Jesse and I are still married. It's been a challenging journey, and I made significant sacrifices to persuade him to stay. In late October, he finally agreed, and we've completed all the necessary paperwork. Now, brace yourselves because you might find my actions a bit unconventional. Please understand that I was desperate and willing to do anything to preserve my marriage with Jesse, which means the world to me. I don't think I could endure or want to live without Jesse, except for my children, whom I also cherish dearly. There wouldn't be much purpose in doing so. Now let me tell you about what I sacrificed. Please be understanding. I agreed to a post-nuptial arrangement with my husband that essentially reduces my share of our assets to 25%, as opposed to the usual 50% if we were to divorce. It's important to note that real estate would still be divided equally at 50-50, but all other assets, such as savings, stocks, 401k, and so forth, would be split unequally at 75%/25% in the event of a divorce. And there would be no alimony, none whatsoever. The only condition is that we must remain married for a minimum of 1 year and continue living together. As part of this agreement, I also allowed Jesse to have a permanent one-sided open relationship, but it's only open for him. I tried to negotiate for a limited free pass or a 3-month arrangement, considering that I only had a one-night stand. But he wasn't willing to accept those terms. He insisted it had to be a permanent arrangement, or we wouldn't have an agreement at all. It took me weeks to find a suitable attorney to represent me, as most of them refused to get involved once they learned the details of my agreement. Eventually, I did find one, and now everything is in place. As for the state of our relationship between Jesse and me, it can be described in one word: cold, very, very cold. Essentially, we're like roommates. Both of us still have feelings for each other, but one party, Jesse, genuinely dislikes the other. I won't use the word hate because in Jesse's own words, he mentioned, "He doesn't hate me. He just doesn't like me anymore." Since the discovery, he's been coming home late, avoiding spending time with me, and refusing any gestures of help or care from me, including not eating anything I prepare. Strangely, he won't even eat food from an opened package, claiming he doesn't trust me with anything. It's absurd because I would never do anything to harm him. My love for him is greater than my love for myself, greater than life itself. He means the world to me, but he can't seem to look past the one foolish mistake I made, just one mistake in 25 years, and he's seemingly willing to discard our relationship like a piece of trash. I'm venting now because my emotions are overwhelming. I just want my man back the way he used to be. Regarding intimacy, it's been non-existent. There's been no kissing, hugging, or cuddling, and we sleep in separate rooms. He did allow me to give him a back massage back in September, but insisted on using a protection. There was no intimacy involved, just the physical act. After he finished, he simply left and returned to our master bedroom, leaving me alone in the guest room where I'm currently staying. There was no kiss or even a "thank you, babe." Nothing at all. Now, you might be wondering, has he taken advantage of his open marriage agreement? I can't say for sure. I don't think he has. And naturally, I hope he never does because it would shatter me emotionally. I understand it might sound selfish, but if he ever becomes involved with another woman, it would deeply affect me. He's my partner, and I want him to be mine and mine alone, and I'll go to great lengths to ensure that remains the case. That's all I have to share for now. Please share your thoughts as I'm eager to read your responses. I realize some of you might think I'm acting irrationally, but my husband means the world to me, and I'm willing to make sacrifices and do whatever it takes to keep him. Final update. It's been some time since my last update, and I've received many requests, so I'm returning to share what's been happening in my life. Unfortunately, my marriage didn't survive my mistake, and Jesse and I ended up getting a divorce. Everything was officially settled on August 17th. After living like mere roommates with no intimacy for 4 months, Jesse initiated the talk one day. He expressed that while he still cares for me and always will, he's no longer in love with me and doesn't have positive feelings towards me. He mentioned his desire to start dating other women, but didn't want to do so while we were still married, despite having my approval and an agreement allowing him to do so. He explained that he just couldn't bring himself to do it. Instead, he wanted to end our marriage promptly, split our assets evenly, and go our separate ways. I made every effort to change his mind, but he remained firm. It was an incredibly challenging period, and I fell into a deep emotional struggle, but Jesse supported me throughout. Once I agreed to the divorce and initiated the process, he felt a sense of relief. With the divorce proceedings underway, he began to communicate more with me and spend time together, but strictly as friends. We both decided to sell our house before the divorce was finalized, and it sold remarkably quickly within 6 days back in March. Following the sale, we secured a 6-month lease for a new luxury apartment, which is set to expire on October 1st. We're living together, and surprisingly, we've been getting along exceptionally well. It feels like we've rekindled our youthful spirits. Being in a different neighborhood has brought a sense of liberation to both of us, considering how uncomfortable it was living in our old one, as you can probably imagine. Speaking of Nate and his wife, they also ended up getting a divorce, and Nate relocated to Laughlin, where he's now working in a store within a casino down there. I had the opportunity to personally apologize to Nate's wife, which turned out to be one of the most challenging things I've ever done. I was extremely anxious and found it difficult to speak, but she made me feel comfortable and quickly accepted my apology. As it turns out, Nate had a history of similar behavior, having done this before on more than one occasion. Additionally, he's in recovery from alcoholism and a gambling addiction. The reason she had us captured on film was her suspicion that Nate had returned to his gambling and drinking habits, prompting her to hire a private investigator to shadow him for 3 days. The affair, combined with Nate's ongoing struggles with alcohol and gambling, played a role in her gaining full custody of their 2 daughters, aged 13 and 14. Strangely enough, she felt thankful for this outcome. It's quite a messy situation, and I can't help but wonder how I got involved with someone like that. Now, shifting the focus back to Jesse and me, as I mentioned, since our move and divorce, we've been growing closer. We've returned to sharing meals, and even enjoyed a couple of dates with each other since moving to the apartment. Then, this past Sunday, we became intimate again. It happened spontaneously and was undoubtedly the most satisfying experience I've ever had, and I'm certain Jesse felt the same way. He clarified that we're not back in a committed relationship, we're just dating. And I'm perfectly content with that. It's an exhilarating feeling, making me feel like I'm 19 again, complete with those delightful butterflies you get when you first meet someone special. I'm riding a natural high that's incredibly intoxicating. I can't even put it into words. Now there's a bit of a complication. Jesse purchased a house in Pahrump, which is about 60 miles away from Vegas. He wanted to escape the hustle and bustle of the city and settle in a place with a small-town atmosphere and conservative values. I was hoping he might invite me to move in with him, but he hasn't extended that offer. I did ask him if it would be okay for me to move to Pahrump as well, and he said he had no objections. I've scouted around the town, but there are very few apartment options available, so I'm considering buying a used RV. Jesse's new home sits on 3 acres of land and has 2 spots equipped with full RV hookups, located about 200 feet from the house. He mentioned I could park there if I decided to go that route, but I'd need to formalize a lease agreement and pay rent to him, which I'm perfectly fine with. He also emphasized that this arrangement doesn't mean we're getting back together, and that he intends to continue dating other women, so he doesn't want me to feel jealous. I assured him that I'm perfectly okay with that, because I'm determined to treat him so well that he won't want anyone else. To all the women in the comments who have been critiquing my husband, making claims about toxic masculinity and such, I kindly request that you cease. This entire situation is unequivocally my fault, and I fully acknowledge my responsibility for everything that has transpired. I'm simply grateful to Jesse and the grace of the Almighty for granting me a second chance at love and life. Wishing you all the best, Debbie.
All right, that was a fun story. Now let's move on to another exciting one. Stay tuned and let's dive in.
My husband, who is 32 years old, wants to end our happy 6-year marriage because of a mistake I made years ago. This mistake happened when he was unemployed, and it's affecting our family now. I am a 28-year-old woman who didn't come from a well-off background, but I always aimed for a better life. Due to my financial struggles, I initially believed that I couldn't afford to go to college. That was until a friend introduced me to the sugar baby lifestyle. At first, I was repulsed by the idea of an older man financially supporting me in exchange for my time, companionship, and affection. However, my strong desire to attend college led me to consider this option, as my grades weren't high enough to compete for a scholarship. During my college years, I had a sugar daddy who paid for my tuition, rent, and other expenses. Once I graduated and secured a decent job, I severed all ties with my sugar daddies and focused on building my career. They had served their purpose, and I no longer needed their support. Later on, I met my current husband at an event organized by a mutual friend. We clicked, and after dating for a year, he proposed. We got married 6 months later. I never disclosed my past to him and hoped he would never discover it. Early in our engagement, we agreed that I would be a stay-at-home wife and mother during our marriage, a role I was content with. In 2019, my husband faced a layoff, and due to COVID-19 restrictions, it was challenging for him to find another job. Our financial situation at home started to tighten, and I confided in my best friend about it. In a light-hearted manner, she mentioned the good old days, when we had men willing to support us entirely. After a few drinks, we ended up browsing sugar dating websites. Although I created an account that day, I didn't start communicating with potential sugar daddies for about 3 weeks. I understand that what I did was wrong, but I did it to ensure my family could maintain the lifestyle we were used to. I reconnected with an old sugar daddy who was on the same website, and we resumed our previous transactional relationship. We went on vacations together, and to cover my tracks, I told my husband that I had a long-lost grandaunt who was gravely ill and wanted to meet her long-lost sister's family. Whenever I returned from these trips or received unexpected money, I claimed it was a gift from this grandaunt. When my husband asked too many questions about her, I assured him that I would introduce them once she got better to avoid overwhelming her with too many visitors. This deception continued for about a year until my husband found a job. At that point, I ended the relationship with my sugar daddy and tried to move on as if he never existed. However, yesterday my husband discovered old text messages that I had thought I had deleted between me and my sugar daddy. He confronted me, and I attempted to explain that I did it for the sake of our family. Still, he refused to listen and used hurtful language to describe me. The situation escalated when he called my dad, inquiring about the supposed long-lost grandaunt, and no one in the family knew who he was referring to. Now, he wants to evict me from our home, and to make matters worse, he's demanding a DNA test for our son. I'm currently staying at my parents' house because I don't feel safe due to my husband's recent behavior. I also admitted to them that I had lied about receiving a college scholarship, and that it was actually funded by an older man, which is the reason for my husband's anger. This revelation shocked and saddened them. They are still coming to terms with this information and advise me to wait for my husband to calm down so that we can have a proper discussion. I believed I was doing what was best for our family, so how can I be in the wrong? How can I work towards repairing my marriage? Update: I allowed him to proceed with the DNA tests, and they confirmed that he is indeed the father of our son. Instead of apologizing for wrongly accusing me of our son not being his, He has filed for divorce and is now seeking full custody of our child. I told him good luck with that. In just 5 weeks, he has managed to turn both of our families against me. My parents have even kicked me out, expressing their disappointment, and my dad has essentially disowned me. They claim I lied to them and withheld the whole truth. What's the distinction? It's all in the past. I can't fathom why everyone is siding with him, especially when he's the one trying to break up our family and take my son away over a mistake I made 3 years ago. The irony is that I did it for us. I saw how stressed he was about his joblessness, so I made sure we were financially stable during that period. Edit. He hired a private investigator to dig into my past for the custody battle. I've made mistakes in my life, but I am a devoted mother. How could he put me through this? How could he do this to my family? I admit to having been a sugar baby at 2 points in my life, but that doesn't diminish my worth as a mother and shouldn't be used to question my character. It seems that the judge bought into his argument because he mentioned that my lifestyle could be a risk to my son. As a result, I was only granted supervised visitation on weekends. I've lost everything. My son, my family, my home. I have nothing left. I had hoped to secure primary custody and have my ex provide child support. I'm deeply ashamed and embarrassed by my actions, but I don't believe it's worth destroying a once happy family. To those anonymous individuals who offer no helpful advice but simply comment that I got what I deserved, you have no insight into the challenges we faced at that time. I had to make difficult decisions to keep our family financially afloat without accumulating debt. How can you pass judgment without ever having walked in my shoes? All I want is for my family to return to the way it was before. My fiancé, 25 male, and I, 24 female, had agreed to go on separate bachelor and bachelorette trips with our friends. It turned out that we were all heading to the same destination when my fiancé caught me kissing another guy, leading him to call off our wedding. My fiancé and I have known each other our entire lives. We attended the same kindergarten and went through high school together. We even became high school sweethearts and maintained a long-distance relationship during college. Throughout all this time, I had never been involved with another man, nor had I ever kissed anyone else. Our bond grew incredibly strong over the years, and he proposed to me a year ago. We had been planning our wedding and had already set a date. About a month ago, my friends, all female, mistakenly added me to the group chat for my surprise bachelorette party. Their original plan was to take me to a strip club the day before the wedding, but I expressed my desire to stay home on that day and not have any strippers involved. As a result, we came up with the idea of a girls' trip to New Orleans. We got the idea for our trip from the movie Girls Trip. We wanted a chance to reconnect and have a good time together, like we used to when we were younger. Our busy lives hardly allow us to get together these days. I discussed it with my fiancé and he agreed. When his best man learned about our trip, he decided to arrange a similar one for my fiancé and their group of friends. Our trip began 4 days before the guys' trip, and my fiancé dropped me off at the airport. Initially, our trip was quite mild, with sightseeing and controlled nights out. As the girls' trip continued, things gradually became more adventurous. We became curious and wanted to try new things. Nothing too wild, but it was enjoyable. I kept calling my fiancé to share my experiences and the new things I was trying. Similarly, when he went on his trip, he shared his experiences with me. Last night, after having quite a bit to drink, we played games with some people we had met during the trip. I was dared to kiss a shirtless, attractive friend we had just met. I went ahead with the kiss, and things escalated, with me ending up sitting on this man's lap, legs wrapped around his waist, in a deep kiss, while a small crowd cheered us on. This is the situation my fiancé walked into. After he pulled me away from the man, he dragged me aside and demanded to know what was happening, accusing me of having an affair. I attempted to clarify that I had just met the guy, and it was only a dare, but he became even more enraged and resorted to name-calling. When I asked him how he could say that to me, he responded with, "What else do you call someone who hooks up with complete strangers?" I was too stunned to react, and he walked away. I wanted to follow him, but my friend suggested that I should give him some space to cool off and talk to him the next day, which is today. I followed that advice and woke up today with the intention of speaking to him. However, his friends informed me that he abruptly cut short his trip, which still had a few days left, and left. I tried calling him, but I believe he has blocked my number. What should I do? Update. I heeded your advice and respected his need for space. I extended my trip for a few days because we lived together, but I would attempt to call my fiancé from time to time. He eventually answered one of my calls. However, he didn't let me speak and simply informed me that the wedding was canceled and that I should never contact him again. I rushed to get back home as soon as possible so that we could have an in-person conversation. When I arrived at our apartment, I discovered that the locks had been changed. I couldn't believe it. I felt like he was taking things way too far over a simple kiss. To clarify, it was only a kiss, nothing more, and it happened when we were both drunk as part of a bet. Frustrated, I called his workplace because he wasn't answering my calls on his cell phone, and we ended up having a heated argument about the lock change and the bachelorette party. The argument concluded with him informing me that he had delivered all my belongings to my parents' house and had already informed them that the wedding was canceled. He sternly warned me not to contact him at work or personally. My mom suggested that he might be getting cold feet, which could explain his extreme reaction. On the other hand, his parents, who care for me like their own daughter, prefer not to get involved and believe that our decisions should be made by us. Afterward, he eventually agreed to meet and discuss our relationship. He expressed that he didn't want to enter into a marriage suspecting that I might jeopardize it for fun or to please a crowd by getting close to a stranger. He also mentioned that he couldn't be with someone who would cheat on him and subject him to humiliation like that. It was hard for me to believe that he could say such things to me over a mere kiss. When I brought up the expenses related to our wedding plans, my friends informed me that he had mentioned I shouldn't be concerned about losing some of his deposits. As I noticed how determined he was to call things off between us, I got anxious and told him I was pregnant, even though it was a complete fabrication. His response was shockingly cold. He insisted on a DNA test before considering any responsibility, as he had lost trust in me. This devastated me, and I reacted by slapping him before storming away. I couldn't understand how he could treat me this way and end our relationship of over 2 decades just because of one kiss. It left me wondering if I had overlooked something or done something terribly wrong.